Hey guys, it's Eshani, aka Total Makeup Junkie 101. So today I have the eyeshadow palette that you guys have been dying to know my thoughts on. Today we are going to be talking about the new Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow palette in Prism. This was a really big shock, at least for me, because I feel like Anastasia's eyeshadow palette releases are generally kind of spread out. This palette released very soon after the really talked about Subculture palette, and I think a lot of you guys were curious to know my thoughts on this palette because of the whole drama and controversy regarding the Subculture. A lot of you wanted to know if the formula of the shadows in here were more like the Subculture or more like the Modern Renaissance. So as always in my review videos, we will be doing a full in-depth look at this palette. I'll tell you guys what I think of the texture of the shadows. I'll show you guys swatches. We'll talk about the packaging. So first and foremost, the palette does come in a really cute box like this. It's got kind of a matte rubberized texture. The palette itself is a beautiful black velvet. It does have the same texture as the Modern Renaissance or as the Subculture palette. This palette is said to be limited edition. It is like a holiday palette launch. It does retail for $42. I picked mine up off the Sephora website. I've also seen it on the Anastasia website, and I'm sure Ulta and Macy's and basically everywhere that sells Anastasia will get this palette soon. The palette itself has a magnetic closure. There is a mirror up here, and then you are getting 14 shadows in here as well as a double-ended brush. The brush does have one flat shader side as well as one kind of fluffy crease side. Taking another look at the actual shadow colors you're getting in the palette, I will say this is a very interesting, very unique mix of shades. When I look at this palette, it doesn't remind me of anything else in my collection. It doesn't look like an ordinary palette. There are quite a few bright pops of color as well as some really nice basic mattes. I really do like the way this palette was put together, but before we talk about the texture of the shadows themselves, let's go ahead and jump right into full palette swatches so you can see what all of these colors look like against my skin. So here we have the top row of the palette swatch. From left to right we have Lucid, Eden, Unity, Sphinx, Osiris, Sphere, and Obsidian. And then here we have the bottom row of the palette swatch. From left to right we have Dimension, Parallel, Pyramid, Throne, Saturn, Eternal, and Lure. Now this palette essentially consists of two main textures. You have the matte formula, and then you also have a, I wouldn't even call it a metallic formula. It's almost like a pressed foiled formula. So let's go ahead and talk about the matte finish first. There are 7 mattes in this palette. So we have these 3 colors here, this one, this one, this one, and this one. The matte shade offerings in this palette are really nice. You have a nice matte black. You have this kind of matte buttercream color, which works on my skin tone as a brow bone highlight. You also have a matte brown, you have a couple of matte peaches, and then of course you have this beautiful bright matte chartreuse green. Really interesting color. The new Kat Von D Satan Sinner palette that I just reviewed recently also has a color very similar to that, and I have to say, I love colors like that. In terms of the texture of these mattes, I will say I was a little bit weary just because you guys know I was a little bit iffy about the mattes in the Subculture palette. I understand why some people like them because they were just insanely pigmented, but for me and my application style, they really didn't work out too well. I will say these mattes are lovely. These really do remind me of the Modern Renaissance mattes. They are powdery, they are very pigmented, but they are not quite as powdery or quite as pigmented or hard to work with as the Subculture ones. At least I haven't had an issue using any of these mattes. I've used the black, I've used the brown. I didn't get a lot of fallout. They built and blended beautifully. So basically, if you like the Modern Renaissance palette and like the mattes in that palette, you will love these. Now jumping into discussing the other texture in this palette, which like I said, does come across metallic, but I would describe them almost as a really kind of dense pressed foil. You have 7 of those pressed foiled colors in this palette. We have these 2 here, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and then this one. Anastasia describes these as the prismatic metallic shadows because they are supposed to have a duochrome nature to them. Not all of them are duochrome. These two right here are probably the most duochrome in the palette, but a couple of these blue shades do have some kind of teal and pink sparkle in them, which gives them an interesting twist. In terms of the texture of these prismatic metallic shadows, they are very, very dimethicone heavy. If you guys don't know what dimethicone does in a shadow, it basically makes it really, really smooth. When you put your finger in them, they feel very, very smooth, but they do kind of chunk up the shadow a little bit. Sometimes it'll make those shadows hard to apply with brushes. I will say my best method of application for these prismatic metallics is with your finger. If you're not a finger user with eyeshadow, then I would say a stiff flat brush is probably your best option, but I did have some trouble picking up, especially this shade up here, Lucid, with a stiff brush. I feel like that one is just so dense. Now I did use this palette today in the eye look I have on right now. I used my favorite shadow in the palette, which is this one right here, Dimension. It is a very, very unique taupey, purpley, blue shade. Just depending on the light, it really reflects so many different colors. I have that shade packed all over my eyelid. I did blend through the crease with Lure, which is my favorite kind of transition color. And then I went in the outer corner with Parallel and then a little bit of Obsidian, the matte black. And then on my lower lash line, I did use Parallel, the dark brown, to just kind of smoke down there. And I think the look turned out really, really beautiful. My favorite thing about this palette is the fact that I feel like there are plenty of warm tone shades as well as cool tones, just depending on the way you want your eye look to go. If you use colors like Dimension, Throne, Osiris, and then if you bring in Lure and Obsidian, you can get yourself a very, very cool toned eye. But then on the other hand, if you go in with shades like Saturn, Eden, Pyramid, Eternal, Sphinx, you can get a really bronzy, warm toned eye as well. I love that you can do basically both sides of the spectrum with this palette, and really easily, and you get a lot of different color options on both sides. I love it about 1.5 billion times more than my Subculture palette, which I actually did end up returning, for those of you guys who are wondering why I'm not doing a side-by-side. But I have seen some amazing beauty bloggers on Instagram do swatch comparisons and side-by-sides of this Prism palette next to the Subculture palette. In case you guys are curious, I'll go ahead and put some of those posts linked down below for you. But regardless, do I recommend this palette? Absolutely. I think it is gorgeous. I think you can come up with so many different looks. I love the way it's laid out. I love that you're getting half matte and half shimmer. As long as you know how to work with these metallic shadows, like I said, fingers are best. I think that this is a really, really beautiful palette, very nicely put together. Alrighty guys, now for some final housekeeping things. These shadows are made in the USA and the brush is made in China. You are getting 0.7 grams of product in each of these pans, which is definitely on the small side. That's about half the size of a full-size MAC eyeshadow. If you multiply that out by the 14 pans you're getting, that means that you are getting 9.8 grams of product total. That means that you're paying $4.29 per gram for this palette. That is definitely on the higher end side of a price per gram. One thing I will say about Anastasia's eyeshadow palettes is that the price per gram value isn't always the greatest. I mean, there are plenty of other palettes that might be about $20 more expensive, but you're basically getting double or triple the amount of product. But if you are a makeup junkie like me and know that you probably won't be going through this palette anytime soon anyways, and you'd rather get a smaller amount of product for a lower price, this is the best way to go. So yeah, that is everything that I have to say on the new Anastasia Beverly Hills Prism palette. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you guys enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for plenty more holiday palette reviews. Thank you guys so much for watching, supporting, and subscribing. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys in my next video on Monday. I'll see you then. Bye!